And now we cross over to our Young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has entered its 11th day, and shelling from both sides has continued to take place, breaking a temporary ceasefire in the southeastern port for the second time and compromising the safety of evacuees fleeing the war. The number of people escaping the country reached 1.5 million just 10 days after the Russian forces invaded, and that's according to Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. There's now growing dread that the war could stretch on for months and even years, according to UK Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab and French President Emmanuel Macron, following a 2-hour phone call with the Russian president on Sunday, concluded that Vladimir Putin intends to go all the way to denazify Ukraine. We discussed these latest developments today with Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Well, Dr. O'Hanlon, now there are reports that Russian attempts to take Kiev have stalled in recent days after facing strong resistance from Ukrainian forces. And, well, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he said that Ukraine can absolutely win the war against Russia and that the war has already not gone as Vladimir Putin might have planned. So what was Mr. Putin's original plan, and what do you think he's grinding towards failure with this war?
You know, it's a hard question. I think that he believed he had such a psychological advantage that he had been successful in previous military interventions on a small scale in Crimea in 2014 and in Syria in 2015. He, I think, is a strong Russian chauvinist and nationalist who is probably rather arrogant about his own abilities and his own country's. And he probably thought that just like the Taliban intimidated the Afghan government into essentially surrendering last summer, that he could intimidate the Ukrainian government and people into surrendering now. That's my best guess. But, you know, to be fair to President Putin, whom I do not like, and I'm not really trying to be fair, but let's bear in mind that many people historically have done the same thing. And the United States, when we intervened in Iraq in 2003, many people thought that would be easy. And it turned out it was not. And if you go back even to the Korean War, obviously the North Koreans did very well in the opening weeks of the war. And then the United States and the Republic of Korea did very well in the next few months in the fall of 1950. And then the Chinese intervened. So in war, things often happen in a very unpredictable way. And you know, sometimes people get a sense of overconfidence because they have a theory of how to win that seems pretty smart or clever, or the initial start to the war goes well. But they forget to account for the fact that adversaries will adapt and that people will fight hard when their own lives and their homelands are on the line.
And well, apparently the Russian president told his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, that demilitarization and denazification, as he said, of Ukraine would be achieved no matter what. Do you think that means that he's willing to use nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all, this language of President Putin is abysmal and horrible, and none of us should be in any way lenient or tolerant of this language. The idea that somehow a Jewish president of a Ukrainian state that fought every bit as hard against the Nazis as did Russia should be labeled a Nazi is absolutely absurd. And it goes to show the degree to which President Putin is completely committed to lying to the world community and to his own people in order to create a psychological climate. Now, I don't really think that means he wants to use nuclear weapons. President Putin is, I think, a bad guy, but I do not think he's crazy. I do not think that he wishes his own country's destruction or his own personal destruction. And he knows that if he were to use nuclear weapons to try to keep attacking further into Europe, there would have to be a retaliation by the United States and other countries in NATO. So what I think he is saying really with the nuclear threat is simply do not think about intervening in this war in Ukraine, because if you do, President Putin, may be willing to use nuclear weapons to defend my own military inside of Ukraine. And on that point, I think he may well be serious, but I don't think he has to worry about that because we're not going to intervene in Ukraine. President Biden's been very clear, and I agree with President Biden on that point. So my own assessment would be that the nuclear threat is really just designed to make sure that NATO does not enter this war as it's currently going on.
Well, Ukrainians have been fighting back for over 10 days now, entering its 11th day of war, but can they continue to put up such a strong resistance?
It's going to be hard for the Ukrainians to keep this up in the sense that their country is being squeezed so dramatically. And the Russians, of course, control much of the road network, much of the rail network. There's no air traffic to speak of. You know, the country, if nothing else, is being just compressed and cut off economically, with the only real border being to the west, the only way that things can get in and out of Ukraine. And that's going to make it very hard for the Ukrainians to persist or to win the war. However, the Russians only have a few roads they can really use to bring in their armor. It's a tough time of year to fight in the cold, snowy, and soon-to-be muddy fields of the Korean Peninsula, like the Korean Peninsula, of the Russian steppe and the Ukrainian steppe. And I think this is just not a good place to want to wage armored combat. And you're stuck on the roads where the enemy knows how to attack you and how to slow you down. And the Ukrainians do have a lot of good anti-tank weapons. They have other ways to barricade the roads. So Russia may be stuck in some parts of the country for a very long time. Unfortunately, it can continue to pound away at Ukraine cities and cut off economic activity in Ukraine. So I think it will gradually strangle Ukraine, even if it's not able to conquer it in a direct physical, geographic sense.
Well, the US and its allies have been imposing sanctions on Russia, of course. And, well, in response to this, Vladimir Putin warned that sanctions from the West are akin to a declaration of war. Now, does this indicate to you that the sanctions are working? And, well, what other measures is the US preparing to take?
Well, you're right. That is an indication, I think, that Putin sees the sanctions as extremely serious, and that he is claiming that we somehow are fighting him already, which of course we're not. And I don't know how he can expect the world to trade with a country and with a president who is nakedly aggressing against another nation right across its border. So I think President Putin better get used to this kind of treatment, because if he continues to attack Ukraine, the economic sanctions will only get worse. And, it may take us a while to develop alternative oil and gas supplies for Western Europe in particular. But I actually think the sanctions will get even stronger if Putin continues the war, and we're not going to be persuaded to stop them just because he doesn't like them. There's a very simple thing for him to do if he doesn't like the sanctions, and that's stop attacking Ukraine and pull his forces home.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he warned that if the West does not increase military aid, then Russia would then advance on the rest of Europe. Do you think that the world should be prepared for such a scenario?
I think Vladimir Putin's most ambitious goal would be to restore a single country that holds most or all of the world's Russian-speaking individuals and communities. So, no, I do not think he would attack Poland. I do not think he would attack even Lithuania, although I suppose he might, in some ambitious sense, want to get all the Baltic states back. But he would probably like to get back parts of Estonia and Latvia, where there are a lot of Russian-speaking individuals. And I think he certainly is tempted to take all of Ukraine, not only to defeat Ukraine militarily, but then to make Ukraine part of Russia, to essentially eliminate Ukraine, to annex Ukraine, or most of it. And that would accomplish most of his goal of reunifying all Russian-speaking peoples under his single and Moscow's single direction. Of course, most of the people he wants to reunify do not want to be reunified with him, but he's not giving them that choice. He is attacking. He has this vision of a grandiose, grand Russia that, again, is not going to extend, even in his best ambitions, as far as the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact. But I think there's a possibility that he could attack in the Baltic states.
Well, nobody can be sure exactly what's running through Vladimir Putin's mind, of course, and there have been questions about his mental health as well. But do you think it really is the revival of the Soviet Union that he's really envisioning, or revenge on America as something?
Well, I think he does want revenge on the United States and NATO. I think he feels that we have offended him by expanding NATO to the east. and also by trying to get other people elected in Russia besides he himself, also by trying to encourage democracy as we define it in Ukraine and Georgia. And he does have a lot of resentment against the United States, and he has a lot of resentment against President Zelensky of Ukraine. So I do think that anger and a sense of betrayal are part of what motivates him. But I don't think he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union for the reason I just mentioned. He really thinks much more about Russia than about the Soviet Union. He has a very nostalgic and romantic view of Russia, and he would like Russian speakers to all be under one common country and ruled by Moscow. But I do not believe there's any evidence for an idea that Vladimir Putin wants to conquer the former Warsaw Pact countries or even necessarily all of the former Soviet Union. But he would like to control peoples that are Russian-speaking or strongly linked to Russia historically or share a strong language with Russia. And of course, that means many, many Ukrainians.
Well, the UK Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has said that he thinks that this war could go on for months and even years. What's your projection?
I agree. I think to me, this looks like Russia's equivalent of the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, or maybe Russia's equivalent of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. It does not look like the Soviet invasion of Hungary or Czechoslovakia. Both of those operations were much quicker and easier in the 1950s and 1960s. This has the potential to end in the next few weeks, but it also has the potential to continue for many months. And even once it is over, so to speak, I'm not really sure it will be over, because Ukrainian resistance might continue at some level. And certainly the world will continue to punish Vladimir Putin economically and punish Russia with sanctions, even stronger than the ones that are in place today, even if the fighting largely ends. So I think Vladimir Putin's made a huge mistake, and he's got to look for a way now to find some kind of a negotiated way out. And I think we should be trying to help. I've got some ideas on how we can try to encourage a little bit of flexibility by President Zelensky, because the alternative is so bad.
That was Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.